Okay, we are live, correct? All right. Welcome everyone to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, March 2nd. Huxballen, we look flat, Squamish, Bylaws. We are very fortunate to be meeting tonight on the unceded territory of Squamish Nation. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carried. We have Ministerial Order M192 that states the district is ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability at this meeting by the following means. The meeting is being live streamed. A video of this meeting will be available on the district's website for viewing on an on-demand basis. The meeting is open to the public for electronic participation via WebEx. Someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are meeting electronically, so just a few rules of engagement. Council members attending this meeting electronically will let me know as the chair when you connect or disconnect, so this can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Council members are to identify themselves when they advise the chair they wish to speak by raising their hand if they're on video, or simply saying chair if they're connected by audio only. With respect to a vote, council members are only required to state a nay vote. No statement is required if the member is in favor. Council members shall put their phone or computer on mute unless it's their turn to speak. That goes for the public and any presenters this evening on staff. Council members will be involved in and participate in the meeting, and council members shall text the corporate officer if they're having technical difficulties. If the difficulties are on our side, we'll recess for up to 10 minutes to get them fixed. But hopefully now that we've got our audio worked out, we should be good to go. Thanks, everyone. Any notice of motion from council? Seeing none, we'll move on. We do have a delegation this evening, and thank you for your patience, Ms. Kahlon, while we got organized. So we do have Harmen Kahlon here from TELUS Communications. So I will turn the floor over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Harmen Kahlon. I work with TELUS on the mobility side of the business. My job is to acquire all the land and infrastructure for building cell towers and providing connectivity to residents in BC. Primarily, I focus on rural and remote BC and connectivity on Indigenous reserves. I'm here to talk with you guys this evening to, one, make a request and to provide some context to that request. I will start with context. What I'm seeking today is a letter of support from Council to accompany an application TELUS is making to Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada's Universal Broadband Fund. This is a fund that has been released by the federal government to support broadband connectivity to Canadians in rural and remote BC, and to Canadians more broadly as well, to get to speeds of what they consider to be the minimum threshold of 50 by 10 megabytes per second, so 50 download, 10 upload. And currently what TELUS is providing is 25.5. So TELUS would like to make an application to the government to support introducing additional equipment onto 2 existing towers in Squamish, one being downtown at our central office, and 2 being the cell tower that we have over at Watts Point. What we would like to do is use the funds to add additional equipment to make the speeds faster and meet the government's minimum threshold that they see as being the bare minimum for Canadians is 50, 10 megabytes per second. We are seeking the letter of support to accompany the application, which closes on March 15th, 2021. And specifically, it is for the residents in the community and on Squamish 24 Reserve. I don't know if anybody has any questions for me or further clarification is required. I'm happy to provide that as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council? Yes, Councilor Tank.
Yeah, thank you. So when I read this, I was assuming or understanding it was similar to that other application, but this seems, which was more general, this seems that it's 2 very specific pieces of equipment in specific locations. And I'm just wondering then if we need or should have any staff input or if this has any relation to us in that respect.
Mr. Cordell is on the call if you would like to respond to that.
Yeah, it's really TELUS building out more infrastructure in town, which I think is a good thing. It's not necessarily going to help us with our project in Paradise Valley, but overall, if you're looking for my opinion, I support this.
Councillor Stoner.
Is there any provision that this ensures that there's an affordability aspect to the service that then gets provided, or is that completely separate from any request being made?
Yeah, that is a separate, it's not included in the application itself, just for clarification. That's a great question. I would like to say that TELUS does have a number for good programs that are available to the community right now, because we do have service for the community. So for example, we have a Mobility for Good program that is really intended to help kids who have aged out of foster care to get a handheld device to support them after they have kind of left the system. We also have a Seniors for Good program that was recently launched to help seniors of lower socioeconomic status to also get cell phones. And we also have a TELUS Wise program, which helps youth learn about safety on the internet, among other programs. And I'm happy to pass that information along. And those are available right now as well.
Thank you. Let's see any other hands. So the request is that we provide a letter of support for their application to the Broadband Fund. I'm happy to move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Herford. I think this is only good news for our community to increase the speeds and increase access. I think together with the application that BYLAWS has put forward for the Squamish Valley and Paradise Valley, I think it makes service that much better in our community. Any further comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks for being with us this evening. Good luck with your application.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Any consideration of unscheduled public attendance? Anyone in the public who feels they can't wait until the next meeting 2 weeks from now? Moderator is not seeing anyone. We don't have any timed item this evening, so we're on to item 9A. 1. So this is first reading for District of Squamish zoning bylaw, amendment bylaw for the low carbon incentive program number 2807-2021. And likely item 2. Mr. Gunner, are you going to cover both of them?
Yes.
Right. And so we will also be talking about amendment bylaw number 2808-2021. This is the university definition update and a clarification on the amble path strata lot number 1. I'll turn the floor over to you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just need the ability to share content on my screen. Aha, there we go. 1 second. All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Matt Gunn. I'm a planner here at the District of Squamish. Tonight I'm presenting bylaws number 2807 and 2808 for first reading. These bylaws pertain to a low carbon incentive program and zoning clarification. Following adoption of the new OCP in 2018, staff began working on a zoning bylaw update. One of the goals of the program is to align zoning with the official community plan. The incentive program I am presenting today is part of that OCP alignment. The proposed incentive program addresses OCP policy, specifically policy 19.6C, to consider options to encourage, incentivize, or mandate energy efficient practices through a density bonus. More recently, the district adopted the Community Climate Action Plan, also known as the CCAP, to reduce emissions by 45% from 2010 to 2030. That was one of the goals. The CCAP includes big moves. Big Move 5 is to build better new buildings. And one of the actions under Big Move 5 is to utilize a density bonus system to incentivize net zero construction and to incentivize low carbon energy sources. And I will note, if there are any questions about the policy background, we do have Mr. Ian Pickett's available to speak to the context and how this program fits into the CCAP. Development of the low carbon incentive was informed by background research intended to identify the best approach. We had consultants Integral Group hired to work with us on this program. The results indicated that a low carbon incentive combined with the BC Step Code provided the best combination of effectively targeting GHG emissions, addressing simple and complex building forms, and minimizing effort for developers and the district. The proposed incentive will encourage construction of buildings that use low carbon energy, namely electricity, rather than high carbon energy sources such as fossil fuels. The focus is ongoing operations, primarily space and water heating applications. Given the intention, the system is proposed as a reductive density bonus. The system lowers the existing density for standard construction, then provides the opportunity to regain the original density by using low carbon energy sources. This approach was selected in order to attain high uptake on this program and to place the focus on lowering carbon rather than increasing density beyond what is currently permitted. The low carbon incentive will apply to residential uses in the bulk of standard residential zones that have established floor area ratios, as well as residential areas in a few specific mixed use zones. This includes all RS zones, most RM zones, and C1 and C4. We have tried to focus on the easiest to address zones and left out a number of areas of the community which may not have maximum floor area ratios or may be subject to phase development agreements or existing land development agreements. The structure of the bonus is to reduce the base maximum floor area ratio in these zones by 1/3. The reduced density for each of these zones is currently outlined in red. This establishes what could be achieved for these zones if standard construction was utilized that had higher carbon production. Buildings that are constructed with low carbon energy sources would then be able to access the original maximum floor area ratio, which are now outlined in red, and this becomes the bonus density. The 33% reduction was selected with the intention of being significant enough that the majority of builders and landowners would see a large financial incentive to undertake low carbon construction. I'd also like to note that staff have adjusted, as part of this bylaw, have adjusted the max floor area ratio for the RS1 and RS1A zones to match the RS2 structure, where there's a slight increase in floor area available when a accessory dwelling unit or secondary suite is incorporated, and that is to incentivize the creation of those rental housing options. And for C4, there's a specific table, which I'm not showing here, but is in the report, that creates the variation on floor area ratio in relation to employment space, but it applies the 33% reduction for high carbon energy sources in the same manner. Whoops. To obtain the density increase, new development would be required to achieve a specific greenhouse gas intensity, which is identified as kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per square meter per year. This metric was selected because it is an existing output of the step code reporting system that is in use, and it's referred to as GHGI. GHGI requirements have been proposed for each of the subject zones based on a greenhouse gas emissions and costing impact study that was completed during background research by Integral. The max GHGI reflects an ambitious approach to GHG reduction. For most buildings, it reflects space heating and cooling and water heating that does not use fossil fuel sources. In addition, it does not accommodate the installation of decorative gas fireplaces or gas cooking stoves. However, it does make one exception, and that is for gas water heating in apartment buildings. Stakeholders indicated that low carbon requirements for full density would be particularly punitive in the apartment structure. And so staff have made this accommodation with the idea that this is an interim allowance to be reviewed in a few years, 2 to 3 years, given technological advancements and industry adaptation. And I would note that there was an error in the staff report, and these pages, this chart was updated. And thanks to the council for pointing out. One of the council members identified that. One of the questions that came up from council about this project was related to end user costs. Early in the project, our consultant Integral Group did complete construction cost analysis for scenarios to help identify the appropriate system, but that analysis wasn't relevant to the final bylaws. It was considering several variables that ultimately were not included, such as mandating specific technology and step code relaxations. However, Integral had previously considered life cycle costs of electricity versus natural gas for low carbon residential projects under a step code analysis, which was one of the most comprehensive metric analyses that have been done for BC. And so they were able to provide some insight on the topic, but they did highlight that information about direct comparison of operational costs for different buildings and energy types under different step code levels is actually not readily accessible here in BC. They noted that analysis requires a substantial amount of research and resourcing to pull together and keep updated, which is why it's not available currently in our province. Having said that, the study they worked on included a 20-year net present value analysis of costs for carbon abatement under business as usual, which would be natural gas, and full carbon abatement, which would be, in this case, electric heat pumps. And that analysis included both the capital costs and then the application of a discount rate to 20 years of operational costs. And the results indicated that for an average single family home in our climate zone built to step 4, compared to a standard baseline, the net present value of natural gas heated homes was about minus $15,500, and the net present value of an electric heat pump heated home was about minus $9,600, which means that for both homeowners, you're financially worse off under the higher step code than the base building code, and that the bill savings from the efficiency don't actually cover the additional capital costs. But the natural gas homeowner is about $6,000 worse off over 20 years compared to the home that would be heated by an electric heat pump. The key variable on ongoing costs is whether a heat pump or baseboard is used for heating, for space heating, if you're in the electrical category. Baseboard heaters do have operational costs that are 2 to 3 times higher, but we don't have the analysis to answer exactly what their cost increases would be, and that analysis would depend on a variety of factors such as size of the home and number of occupants. The proposed system that we're considering today is structured around emission targets, and it doesn't actually specify a type of technology, whether that be baseboards or heat pumps. And this is to provide flexibility. Builders can use heat pumps or baseboards to achieve the goal, which allows the market to trade off initial capital costs versus long-term operational costs. If, for example, council was desired to focus on reducing, for example, operating costs over time, it would be possible to structure the bylaw to mandate heat pumps, for example, but recognizing that would create upfront capital costs, and that is not currently how the bylaw is structured, so that would require a change. Next, engagement has been conducted at the involved level in the IAP2 spectrum. It has been challenging given COVID. A detailed story map website was established online in mid-August last year with details about the program. The landing page for the incentive program has just under 2,000 views. Digital open houses were conducted in early September 2020 for the development community and the public. The open houses story map and survey that was conducted was promoted in the newspaper, in the district e-news, and through social media and in a press release. A survey was conducted in fall of 2020. It had 55 responses and a 60% completion rate. And in October, council asked staff to conduct further engagement. So we created a simplified web content. There was some concern that the content was overly complex, and so that description of the program was simplified, and the survey was simplified to really get at the key components. And that survey was conducted early this year. That survey received 137 responses and had a 100% completion rate. I've got just a little bit of detail, 2 questions to share with council. The first question in this survey was about the approach that restricts the size of high carbon homes. 53% of respondents were supportive or strongly supportive of using this negative incentive as proposed. 40% were opposed or strongly opposed. And the last question was, or the last multiple choice question was regarding the proposed system in general. 57% of respondents were generally supportive or strongly supportive of the program. 40% were opposed or strongly opposed. There were a number of comments. Just a quick review of the open-ended question comments. Those that were opposed to the program indicated that residents should have the option to use natural gas, particularly for cooking in fireplaces, to limit dependency on one energy source. The program should offer a positive rather than a negative incentive. Embodied carbon should be addressed. The program was considered costly by people who opposed the program, and the electric grid was identified as potentially not supporting the proposed increases. Comments from those who were supportive were that the program should include restrictions on future connections to natural gas, that you should not allow natural gas for water heating in apartments, that the program should not allow any natural gas use in any new buildings across all zones, and that there should be an incentive for heat pumps. In addition to establishing the low carbon incentive bylaw, or the low carbon incentive system, Bylaw 2808 also includes additional amendments related to an existing bonus system that is based on achieving one additional step on the BC Energy Step Code. This bonus is no longer available for some building forms due to new higher step code requirements in the district. The bonus allows an increase in size for caretaker dwellings and accessory dwelling units on lots over 0.2 hectares and a 1.5 meter increase in height for buildings in areas with a high flood construction level. 2 updates are proposed. For the caretaker and accessory dwelling units, the additional floor area would be available if 10% of the annual energy consumption of the building is generated from renewable energy sources such as solar. And for buildings in areas with a high FCL, the 1.5 meter increase in height is available with the 10% renewable energy, or if it's an apartment in a high FCL area, the bonus would be available if they're built to the low carbon building standard proposed as part of the low carbon incentive, and meet a more restrictive maximum greenhouse gas intensity that would require electric water heating systems. Both of these are intended to spur adoption of solar and electric hot water heating for apartments in our development community. In tandem with the incentive program bylaw, 2 priority housekeeping amendments are proposed through Bylaw 2808. The first update is related to Quest University. Staff proposed that university definition be updated to ensure alignment with the intention of the OCP Sea to Sky University Subarea Plan. The proposed definition replaces the existing definition and includes reference to the provincial legislation that established Quest and the degree granting characteristic of the institution. The owner of the campus property did provide a response to this when being notified. They are not supportive of the amendment and ask that it be abandoned. More detail in their response is included in a letter that was sent to council. The second amendment in the bylaw is related to Amblepath, Strata Lot 1, where the Platypus Daycare is currently located or was located. Staff proposed that CD Zone 35, which is for Amblepath, be amended to prohibit single-use dwellings and home occupation offices on that lot, thus limiting the permitted use to daycare facility and accessory uses. And the intention is to clarify that Strata Lot 1 is intended for use as a daycare only. The owner of the building has responded to notification of this proposed amendment. The owner of the building did indicate that they only intend to use the property for childcare, that there's strong demand for that use in the space, and that they have received a number of childcare proposals to replace the YMCA, which is vacating the Platypus Center, but they also indicated that they would prefer not to lose future options of use for the property. Staff recommendation is that council give both bylaws first reading tonight, and these are the motions for that reading. But staff would also like to highlight that if council prefers, both bylaws could be given first and second reading tonight and schedule a public hearing, which has been arranged for potential as March 23rd. And the motions on screen would enable that course if council prefers that option. That is the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Yeah, I'm going to try and turn off sharing. There we go.
Questions from council? As I understand.
There's a lot of discussion internationally about total carbon emissions in global new construction, and observations and increasing awareness that embodied carbon is a very large factor and perhaps even equal if you like, to operational carbon. We received a number of comments which you have alluded to, Mr. Gunn. For example, embodied carbon should be addressed rather than a focus on operational carbon footprint of the construction sector in a more broad picture should be looked at. Building process versus operational process. We've received quite a number of comments along this line. The City of Vancouver has been looking at this also into red listing risky materials and products, for example, fluorocarbon-based insulation products. My question to you, and perhaps Mr. Pickett's, is that, and you do refer to the consideration being given to these topics in other district initiatives. Can you do you have a brief reporting on how this might be addressed? What is the your status of reviewing these factors that are pointed out by so many of our correspondents?
Mr. Gunn, do you want to take this first?
I have a very brief, through you, Mayor, a very brief response, and that is that I think there's strong recognition of the importance of addressing embodied carbon. This project was initiated with a focus that did not include it within the scope. And so as part of bringing this bylaw forward, we haven't addressed it, but it is something that is under review, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pickett's. If Mr. Pickett's could provide any kind of insight into the status of that project or that consideration.
Sure, thanks very much. It's an excellent question and a good point, Councillor Anderson. And ironically, the more progress we make towards operational emissions, the larger proportion of our emissions are embodied carbon. So, it's a problem that is growing relatively in importance. As of now, the embodied carbon is covered in Scope 3 emissions, so it's not part of our community emissions. So although we allude to it in the CCAP, there's not explicit actions apart from learning more and trying to gather more information. I was on a webinar just last week, and I believe Mayor Elliott and Councillor Pettingill were on it as well, an excellent webinar. One of the presenters was the City of Vancouver, and they're a world leader in embodied carbon. So it's exciting that just down the road we have a municipality taking action on it. We are working on a greenhouse gas impact tool, working with carbon accountants, and we are incorporating embodied carbon in that tool as a way to start getting a better understanding. So in short, we're very aware it's a challenge and an opportunity. It is not yet in our scope of emissions. So, it's something that we are going to need to both push and be pushed toward incorporating it into our kind of carbon budget and into our responses. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. From Council Pettingill, and then Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if following up, if Mr. Pickens can just clarify, because what I did take from that presentation was that while you're using natural gas in your buildings, that is the major source of emissions that far outweighs the embodied. And then once you go to all electric, then you start to say, oh, hey, now we have this embodied issue. But while you're still using gas, that is the primary source of overall emissions. That's kind of what I gathered out of the presentation. Is that sort of your understanding of where we are and why we're maybe focusing on the fuel source initially?
I would mostly agree with that. The one thing I took away from it is I believe it's about 3/4, 1/4. But with even just with energy efficiency, that is, once we get to like step code 4, then it's more along the lines of 50-50, and then definitely as with the fuel switching, as this bylaw proposes, the lion's share clearly goes toward embodied carbon. So thank you. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and one of actually a lot of that I'm quite optimistic about. There's actually viable carbon negative technologies. So it's a really exciting endeavor, and I'm excited to keep pursuing it.
Do you have a follow-up related to that, Councillor Pettingill, or can I move on?
No, I just wanted that clarification. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Gunnar?
Thank you. A few questions. The first is I noticed in the definition of renewable energy sources in the bylaw, Mr. Gunn, we don't actually refer to hydropower specifically. We provide sunlight, wind, tides, wave, biomass, and geothermal heat. And I'm just curious if that was intentional.
Yeah, I don't think it was intentional to exclude it from, I think the approach was thinking what would be the likely pieces that we would incorporate, or the likely energy sources that we might incorporate into, for example, a townhouse or apartment development in, kind of within Brackendale or another part of town, but perhaps an oversight in not including hydro as a micro hydro might be a viable option. Perhaps that's something that should be added in.
Okay. And then just on that note, there were a number of comments about some concerns around this leading to kind of a single source of energy and the impact that that might have if there is a power outage of the grid. But my understanding is that we aren't necessarily dictating a specific energy source, that there are options available through this incentive program that builders can kind of choose, pick your own adventure, choose your own adventure to get to the end goal. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, so there's a couple of things I could say on that. It's an interesting topic and one that was raised, and I've had some conversations with some of the individuals who do share that concern. Okay, so first off, the bylaw doesn't in any way say thou shalt use electricity from the grid or any particular source. It's technology agnostic. The idea being that we know that there are some energy sources that create GHGI. That's an impact we don't want. The full focus is on that. Don't create GHGI, no problem, good to go. So if, for example, a very efficient home can utilize solar, and it's over an annual budget. So if in the annual budget there's enough solar input that I can offset other uses or other energy sources that may have carbon associated with it, that could balance out. So there's it does not specify thou shalt use BC Hydro electricity, and therefore you're connected to the grid and dependent on it. But then on top of that, the most likely scenario is that BC Hydro electricity is the source for most of the electricity that would be used in these residential buildings. And so as that concern came up, I did engage with BC Hydro to speak specifically to that. And there were a few different aspects of that conversation. One was, what's the likelihood of an extended period of power outage? That would be an unusual event. And their comment was that, the likelihood of what you would see in the future is probably related to what you've seen in the past. And so, our vulnerability to a large power outage does theoretically exist, but it's not something we experience on a regular basis. And then the other thing that they said is that, because some of the comments were, well, that makes us vulnerable to these events where we might not have electricity for a period of time. And they said, well, that's BC Hydro identified that is not an unusual situation in our province. There are areas, for example, parts of the island where there are communities that have nothing but electricity. Even Pemberton, the electricity is the common form. That there are places where you don't have gas hookup. And then in the Lower Mainland, they said there are entire large development projects that are being built entirely on electricity. So it's not out of the norm to have electric only as the main source and to not have a gas hookup. And so that was their response, that was not an unusual circumstance to achieve.
That's helpful, thank you. And then one further question that's tangentially related is this risk of it resulting in increased use of wood-burning fireplaces to help offset. And I'm just curious what we see there as a risk for increased air pollution and how we might try and address that over time.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mayor, that I have heard that most recently in the final survey. It's not something that came up earlier, and so it's not something that we've explored in much detail or if at all. And so that's something that we would probably need to spend some time looking into to figure out how to address. But as part of this project, we have not come up with strategies to address that.
That was me, correct? You kind of cut at the end there.
Sorry, yes, Councillor Herford.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Are there protections in this so that if the project receives their density, they don't connect down the road?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, so that was considered and not addressed. There was some consideration of would it be appropriate to try and build in some type of requirement for a covenant that there would not be a future hookup to gas. A couple reasons. One, although we didn't explore it, there was some question as to whether or not that might lead to some legal challenge from a gas provider. And then two, the other piece was that our intention was if we provide, and these are higher energy step code homes. And so the thought is that without getting too heavy handed, if we have efficient homes that are constructed with hookups with heating and hot water, both space and hot water heating that are effective and efficient, and technology improves over the coming years before the elements that are installed expire from over their lifespan, that hopefully at that time the products that are available are appealing and enticing, and that people will choose to retain the electric nature of their energy needs. It is possible we could explore heavier-handed strategies, but given this was a new incentive program and it was already fairly dramatic in the reduction of density, the decision was not to pursue stronger or firmer tools for ensuring that they stay electric.
Thank you. One more, if I may. You mentioned the existing phase development agreements, and there are quite a few properties under those existing agreements. I'm curious if there's opportunity, if changes come forward to the development agreement, perhaps need to do a rezone or some reconfiguration, if there's opportunity to insert this policy, and is that something that staff's considered?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, I think one of the goals of getting a density bonus system like this in place, and as well thinking about the smart growth neighborhood incentive that has been discussed with council in the past, is that being fairly new and somewhat dramatic programs, staff's perspective is that it's a good idea to go in with the kind of easiest to achieve initial implementation. And so choosing the straightforward RS, RM zones is a good way to get it started. But once that structure is within the bylaw, the application of that structure to other zones becomes a lot easier. And so, for example, adding a CD zone into the table is not a significant change. And so in the future, as, for example, new projects come in, it would not be a big step to say, well, have you considered adding this element in? We can make a change to the zoning bylaw as we add your CD zone so that the low carbon applies to you. Or if other projects are getting renegotiated or there's discussion around amending zoning, and then there would be the possibility of applying it. So getting the structure into the zoning bylaw creates essentially a springboard that could be used to apply to other properties and zones over time.
Thank you.
Councillor Race.
Thank you. So when I look at this, it seems to significantly encourage the use of heat pumps. And, in density, that can be quite a lot of heat pumps in a relatively small area. And from my observation, there are differing degrees of how obtrusive heat pumps might be. And I'm wondering if there's anything accompanying this that would talk about buffering or muffling or something like that to address what might become a very noisy neighborhood, especially in a dense development.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you. That's a good question. And that, in fact, has come up, not related to this project, but has in the past come up as a question: how do we manage the sound that's associated with heat pumps? It also applies to air conditioning. Those units can cause a fair bit of noise to neighbors. And so I think there's a more broad question that we have not tackled at this point, but a more broad question around should we be putting provisions in to try and mitigate noise from infrastructure from adjacent, for example, single-family homes, or for projects that are adjacent to single-family homes, or any of those places where there's maybe an easy opportunity for noise to impact neighbors. We haven't addressed it in this one, and partly it's that the project does not actually the heat pumps are one of the options that could be used, that would have a higher upfront capital cost, lower operating cost, and this is considered desirable, but we didn't specify that that was what had to be used. Baseboard heating is probably going to be used in a number of these developments under this density bonus system as well. And so by not getting into the details of what technology was being used, we didn't really pursue that further and try and mitigate impacts from some of those potential technologies. But it's a good point. It's something that could be added to a future update to zoning, and probably would want to look at it more than just related to this project, but as I said, to air conditioning and other types of mechanical infrastructure that gets put on tops of apartments or in townhouse buildings, those types of things. It is a legit concern for sure, and probably worth some time and effort.
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Gunn. The first is, if someone wants to put in natural gas for cooking or for a barbecue outlet, can they do that as long as they meet the GHGI, the greenhouse gas intensity number?
Yes. So the numbers, the catch that would prevent that is the table that says what GHGI those types of developments need to achieve, and that number is going to be evaluated against the work that an energy advisor would do, both at pre-construction and at compliance, post-construction reporting. That work is done through modeling software called, generally Hot 2000 is used for that, and it outputs a GHGI number. So if the person who's building desires to pursue something like gas for cooking, and they can come up with a system that has a number below the threshold of that Hot 2000 output, it theoretically would be possible. When we worked with Integral to create that table, they designed that table. In our early engagement, we were considering, well, should we allow decorative fireplaces and cooking stoves? And so there was a table that had the numbers for those two different options. And ultimately, through the early engagement, primarily with the development community, it didn't seem like that was a huge concern. And so we went for the more restrictive. And so the numbers that are reflected in that table are intended to make it so that you would not be able to use cooking and decorative fireplaces. But it does not say you can't do that. It's just whether or not you can reach that threshold. So maybe there's some ultra low gas efficient. I'm not sure. I would say, I'm guessing no, but the system is set up to not allow it. But it is possible that it may be viable.
Somewhat related to this, there's a talk of how the energy modeling works once the build is complete, and so that people can't game the system. So have a primary heating source that's but then there's a secondary. So could you just, I wasn't totally clear on how this works to make sure that.
Yeah. So I spent some time talking to energy advisors as I was trying to understand how to structure the system, and actually more in the step code bonusing structure that is also included in this. And one of the things that the energy advisor said is that that Hot 2000 system gets gamed pretty heavily. And the way they do it is that they say, okay, well, our primary heat is baseboard heatings, but we're going to have a secondary system, which is in-floor heating, and it's powered by natural gas. And the way the HOT 2000 system is structured, it bases the calculations on GHGI on the primary system. In fact, I think all of energy is based off that primary system, and the secondary system actually doesn't factor in. It's just assumed it's not contributing energy or GHG emissions. And so if that's allowed, we can get our whole system circumvented by people just coming up with secondary systems that use GHGs or that produce GHGs based on fossil fuels. So in our requirement for the density bonus, we've stipulated that the GHGI analysis, or the HOT 2000 analysis, and the GHGI number that it produces has to be based on analysis where any fossil fuel source is considered the primary source. It's just in the analysis, they just need to say which one's primary and which one's secondary. And so we're saying that's what has to happen. So there's going to be a learning curve where as people are applying, we're going to have to say, hey, if you're going for the density bonus, you're going to need to ensure that your analysis identifies any fossil fuel source as the primary in creating that GHGI. And from conversations with the energy advisors, they have indicated that is not, if they know that information, that's not a hard thing to do.
Great, thank you for that clarity. And then my final question is just about the density bonus transitional provisions for in-stream projects. And I'm just looking at the one for development permits that are in stream, and where the low carbon incentive is not required. And it says they have to have the DP submitted prior to June of this year and issued prior to December 2022. And I wondered why we created that on the lease.
The whole table of provisions was to make sure we weren't catching people off guard who were already invested in a project. Which is, we want to get this all done over time, and once it's all fully locked in, we'll be getting low carbon buildings. But we wanted to be careful about stuff that's in stream, and that buffer is to account for the processing time. If there is hangups or that process is delayed or takes time to work through, we don't want somebody to apply and then, as we're going through, say we don't have capacity to work on the project internally, say there's delays in the processing of that application, it would be considered probably quite frustrating to a developer who had gotten their application in at a reasonable time, but because of capacity issues, they passed their window to get the DP issued, and thus they had to go back and possibly rework the entire DP. It's trying to be a empathetic implementation of the requirements.
Fair. Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Stoner.
Just one further quick question. I'm just curious how renewable natural gas is incorporated or impacts the GHGI calculation.
That's a good question. I can't say that I've actually gone down that road. I'm going to presume that the HOT 2000 has some way to address that, but maybe Ian can speak to that. I don't know the answer to that question, though.
Go ahead, Mr. Pickett.
Through the mayor, it's a really good question. The modeling assumes a proportion of the natural gas is renewable natural gas. So over time, the carbon content of natural gas is going down. But targets for renewable natural gas are still not terribly ambitious at this point. I think the 2030 target is 15% or 25%. So with natural gas, you still couldn't. I don't think you get close to these GHGI targets. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Any last questions? So council, there's on the agenda, we can give first reading. The alternate recommendation is 2 readings and a public hearing on the 23rd. And we have to read the bylaws separately. So Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I was going to move to both readings and schedule the public hearing. If I have a seconder, and do we need to do them? Oh, the 2 bylaws are separate. Yeah. Okay. So the
bylaw 2807, Councillor Herford is moving first 2 readings and scheduling the public hearing for March 5th. there a seconder? Councillor Stoner is seconding that. Any comments? I've got Councillor Anderson, Councillor Stoner, Councillor Banger. Go ahead, Councillor Herbert.
Thank you. I think this is an important step and forward in our greenhouse gas and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of the concern that I heard in the community was I felt was really coming from if I had to do this with my existing home, and we're talking about high step code, high performance buildings, and I think this is a needed step to ensure the future of our community for the next generations to come. So I'm happy to support it and look forward to the public hearing. Thank you to staff for all the work to get it this far. Thank you.
Councillor Herford, Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I'm happy to support this package, and I think that it struck the right, well, the strategic elements are very appropriately targeted. I'd like to bring up the topic of wood-burning stoves and the potential of increased use of them. We should be mindful of the fact that the district itself, the District of Squamish, was a partner in establishing a regional air quality coordinating entity. And today that is under the name of the Society for Atmosphere Solutions. It covers the whole Howe Sound region and has a substantial effort ongoing on wood-burning stoves. So that we do have this initiative, and it is perhaps underemphasized. And I think that the element of wood-burning stoves is an important one, and I'm pleased that Councillor Stoner has raised it. Otherwise, I'm happy to support this package as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, I will be supporting the motion for this to go through 2 readings and schedule a public hearing. I'd like to thank staff for all their work and their substantive efforts to re-engage the community on this comprehensive topic. I do think that we've seen a substantial increase in survey responses, as well as a few innovative ways to engage online through mayor's drop-ins and things like that on this important topic. So that's been really helpful to me to see that higher level of engagement. I still think that this is a large topic that people are trying to wrap their heads around. So I am curious to hear what we'll hear at the public hearing. I do think it is important to move this forward, though. As mentioned, the goal here is about lowering carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, not necessarily to increase density. We know that natural gas through our Community Climate Action Plan accounts for 25% of our community greenhouse gas emissions. And so realistically addressing that is a super high priority and needs to be a high priority for our community. But it is only one piece of the puzzle. So I did hear a lot in the community feedback that there were questions as to why we're focusing on this and not other elements. I just want to rest assured that this is one piece of the work that we're doing. This is Mr. Pickett's full-time job is addressing the Community Climate Action Plan and initiating it. We're doing a lot of work on zero waste and the landfill emissions. And I do see this being one step towards building better buildings for the future. And it's not the only step that we'll take. I think that there's further work that'll be done. But happy to see this move forward to the first 2 readings. And the only change that I would request is that the inclusion of hydro be listed in the renewable energy sources in the bylaw definition. Thanks.
Is that an amendment? You would need to move an amendment, Councillor Stoner.
Good point. I will move an amendment that we include hydro in the definition of renewable energy source in the bylaw.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councillor French. Any debate on the amendment? Councillor Pettengill?
Just wonder if it's worthwhile or if it's already covered in the wording, but renewable hydro, if BC Hydro for whatever reason decides to build a bunch of coal plants, then and maybe that's just going too far, but that would be my only concern is I think we are focused on sort of any sort of renewable energy inclusive of hydro.
Implied in the name, in the definition.
Okay.
Renewable.
Okay. just as long as that's clear, then that's great.
Okay, I'll call the question on the amendment. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we're back to the main motion on the floor. Are you done with your comments there, Councilor Stoner? Okay, thank you. Councilor Pettengill?
Yeah, thank you. I want to really appreciate the engagement work that's been done all along on climate action. I think it's been really strong and really important to help bring the community along. We're looking at a lot of change. We have very little time to do it, and there's a part of me that would like to go a lot further. I am concerned that we're not including commercial buildings and industrial buildings in this when I, again, look at the calendar. So I'm hoping that we will get there, that this will give us some comfort that we can get there much sooner. You know, looking at the public feedback, because this is some change from where we've been, I'm not surprised there's some concerns, but I really appreciate, and it aligns with what I'm hearing, that there is really strong public appetite and demand for strong climate action. And I think we see that support in the survey and support to even go further, which I appreciate. I see this as consistent with our OCP, and I think, you know, one of the real strengths in this is that it gives people a lot of choice, and the incentivized choice turns out is the lower cost choice over the long term. And so I think this is a win on many levels, and I will be happy to support it.
Councilor French?
Thank you. I briefly wanted to thank staff for the great work on this and acknowledge the extra steps in extra engagement in the process. And I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gunn, I'm going to allow you to intervene in the conversation here, even though we have a motion on the floor. Go ahead. You're just on mute.
Apologies, I know I'm not supposed to, but I just realized one thing through you, Mayor. The one thing I just realized is that the definition of renewable was set up to try and create an incentive to have a structure that's maybe hooked up to electricity already, stretch and add another energy source like solar in, and get that bonus, which might be which is the height bonus or exercise. If we add hydro into that definition by hooking up to BC Hydroelectric grid, would they achieve that and thus be able to immediately get the density bonus without going further to add solar or geothermal or something to that effect? That might be a problem with that amendment. I think I need to think through that. Yeah.
The definition is related to the incentive to add a renewable energy source above and beyond electricity. Councilor Stoner.
That is an important clarification. I thought it was a general definition that was being added that was relevant to the incentive program as a whole. So if that is the case, then I would like to rescind my motion.
Already voted on it. So I'll bring it back for reconsideration.
Apologies.
So I think to bring it back for reconsideration is to vote against it, would take out the hydro reference and keep it clear that it was linked to the incentive, not the program. Is that clear, folks? So Councilor Stoner wants you to vote against her amendment now. And thanks for the clarity, Mr. Gunn. It's important that we don't pass amendments that end up getting us into trouble. So, all right, so I'll call the question. All those opposed? Everyone opposes. Herford, French, Anderson, Stoner, Elliott, Pettengill. Motion carries. So that amendment dies. Okay, now on the main motion, which is to do first two readings of this and schedule a public hearing for the 23rd. I will call the question. All those, any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And now for the next bylaw, I would move first to readings with the public hearing scheduled for March 23rd. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any comments on this one? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Gunn and Mr. Pickett, for joining us this evening. Okay, so next up is item 9A3. This is District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw Amendment Bylaw for District Lot 509 and 510, number 2735, 2020. And Mr. Velasquez, are you presenting this evening?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you see my screen?
We can. It's not in presentation mode yet, but we can see it.
It should be in presentation mode now, is it?
Yeah.
Perfect. So greetings, Squamish Council and community. My name is Jonas Wolnischkis. I'm the district's community plan director of community planning. And today I am introducing an official community plan amendment application for Lot 1 of District Lots 509 and 510 for a council's decision. So this is a large parcel we're all familiar with. It's approximately 170 hectares in size, located just north of the Garibaldi Highlands. The current land use designation, as identified in our OCP, is future residential neighborhoods, and the parcel is currently located outside of the growth management boundary, as identified in Schedule C of the official community plan. Included here is a definition of what future residential neighborhoods are considered in our OCP. These areas have been essentially set aside to accommodate long-term growth through neighborhood planning. A bit of a background on this application. And this property in 2017, the owner applied to amend the OCP to remove the population threshold of 22,500. Back then we weren't at that level yet. From the lands and allow for consideration of development on the property. In 2018, the application was defeated based on lack of alignment with OCP policy. And in early 2020, the owner applied for a pretty much same two amendments. The application and policy analysis was presented to Committee of the Whole on December 8th of last year. So this is just a summary of the proposed amendment. So there's two amendments. The first one is to amend the growth management boundary to include District Lot 509 and 510 into the growth management boundary. So here on the left, you see the current growth management boundary, and on the right is the proposed boundary. The second amendment is to change the land use designation for the lands from future residential neighborhoods to residential neighborhoods. Staff presented the policy analysis of the application at the December 8th Committee of the Whole meeting. It was established that while the population threshold has been met, the policy work listed in OCP policy 9.2H, which you can see underneath here, that policy work has not been completed. So at this point, because the policy, this is a key requirement for any further review of the application, it is currently not meeting the OCP, the critical OCP policy. So staff recommendation is that council approve two resolutions. One is for consultation, that sufficient consultation has occurred with this OCP amendment. And the second motion is for no consultation required with other levels of government as well as First Nations. So these two are necessary for an OCP amendment. And then the third recommendation is a resolution that council defeat first reading of the application based on lack of compliance with OCP policy. And I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, I will go to you now and see if you have any questions for Mr. Velenuskis. Sorry, it just appeared on my screen now. Were there any hands? I'm not seeing any hands. The first motion in front of us are the two motions to approve based on consultation. Is there someone that wants to move that? Moved by Councillor Pettingill, seconded by Councillor Stoner. And Ms. Arthurs, we can move both of those together. Is that correct? Yes, these two can go together. They can go together. Any comments? I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carried. You're opposed, Councillor French? Yes, you want me to register that as an opposing vote? Councillor French opposes, motion carries. Okay, and then that District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw Amendment Bylaw number 2735 be given first for reading. There's someone that wants to put that motion on the floor. Moved by Councillor Pettingill, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any discussion on this? Councillor Stoner, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, although I did second this motion, I will not be supporting it. I am generally supportive of this project moving forward if and when the OCP policies have been met. And I think as per the staff report that we have seen, a substantial number of the OCP policies with respect to the growth management boundary have not yet been achieved. That goes across many of the policies in section 9, but in particular 9.2H, where there are a number of outstanding policy pieces of work that we need to do on our end to make sure that our house is in order before we start to address some of these really big questions around extending our growth management boundary. In particular, I'm looking for the wildfire DPA, the steep slopes DPA, and the missing middle housing policies to be complete, because I think those are really important to have clear on the table so that we are, before we start to address anything that may extend our growth management boundary. There was so much time and effort that was put into the OCP development, and I want to recognize the work that our community, previous councils and staff have done in order to establish that strong vision for our community. And so that is why I will not be supporting the motion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Pettingill, then Councillor Anderson, then Councillor Brace.
Yeah, thank you. Although I move this, I will not be supporting it. I have been a strong supporter of our OCP and the growth management boundary. I think the policy in it is quite strong, and I agree we have not met the policy requirements. And from my perspective, the question is there a reason to proceed even though it doesn't meet the current policy? And when I look at what's been presented or what I've seen so far, I do not see a rationale for proceeding earlier. And I wanted to comment that we are expected by the province ideally to renew our OCP every 5 years or so. And because we do a lot of public engagement, and it's the reason why the current OCP has a lot of public support, we don't necessarily always hit every 5 years, but we update that OCP regularly. And that includes adjusting thresholds and boundaries and philosophies and all those good pieces. And so it's by design that those things change over time. And I think it's really important for the public to recognize that. And we will be doing this OCP review again in a few years. And when I look at the reasons why people are pushing for this, those are big OCP topics. They're not like a minor housekeeping amendment like we've done with some of the other things. This is a major, I think, conversation. And I don't think we're at a point where it makes sense in the middle of a pandemic to rush that big conversation ahead. I think we have that big conversation as a community regularly, and there's some big meaty things to talk about in here. And so I look forward to doing that again in a few years. And I think that's the appropriate time to have that discussion if we want to change some of the requirements, so a development like this could go ahead. But as I look at the current policy, I don't see a rationale for moving ahead with what's requested. And so I will not be supporting this resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Pettengill. Councillor Anderson.
I will be supporting this resolution. I have always believed that these lots 509, 510 should not be included or should not be excluded from our growth management boundary. If we look back to 1958, when Pat Good bought lot 511 and Rainier Wood Fiber bought lot 515, there was planning done at that time that included this lot 509 and 510 in a future residential area. I believe it's a sound place to be putting residential development, and I'm concerned about the congestion we have and the competition for land uses in the valley bottom, and that's just a kind of a high level. The 1998 and 2009-10 OCPs, respectively, gave these lots some special status, which I disagreed with at the time. There were different reasons given on both those occasions, and this was carried over in the recent OCP. I do acknowledge that there is a number of policy work tasks to be undertaken, and these are partly underway. But fundamentally, I do not agree that 509, 510 should be excluded from our growth within our growth management boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Race.
Thank you. And I will not be supporting this. And I wanted to go back just a little bit. Last term, of course, is when we adopted the OCP, and we had a significant discussion around the growth management boundary, which was a new feature of our OCP. And it was in response to the significant feedback we got from the public about managing growth. It was a concern, a widespread concern in our community. And staff came up with this concept of growth management boundary. I remember listening to them on it. And we had a lot of discussion last term about this. And I and many others on council were concerned that it not be an absolute, but rather that it be something that could, in certain circumstances, if there was significant community need or benefit or desire, that it could be something that was amended and dealt with and expanded if we saw the need arising. However, not until after the population reached 22,500, and not until after some precursors, as we referred to them, and Councillor Stoner referred to them, were completed. We wanted those precursors. It didn't make any sense to start planning a major development until we had that kind of information to feed into the plan. Otherwise, the plan could go off in a different direction, and we would either have to backtrack or ignore the new information that we had. So those were two essentials in my mind. But apart from that, the door was left ajar to consider the social and economic and environmental impact, both positive or negative, of a proposal for lands outside the growth management boundary. So today, I accept we are at 22,500 or more. So that population issue is, from my perspective, no longer applicable. But the precursors are not completed, as was noted, and we still have to consider social, economic, and environmental impact before we head off. I've been reminded in correspondence recently, I've received a lot of the comments made in a meeting on October 2nd, 2018. And so I went back, and the advantage of our archive system on the website is you can now go back and look at that. And whether or not I had made any kind of promise, it's quite remarkable to think a councillor in any issue would make a promise like this to support something going off into the future. And sure enough, I did not. What I did do is speak, as I have just spoken now, about the need for the population, which we've now met, the need for the precursors, and how it didn't make sense to proceed without those being completed, and also the need for the eventual environmental, social, and economic impacts of it. So I think that's where we are. I think the timing of this application is off. Eventually, we will get those precursors done. We can then, if the applicant wants to, we can try to bring this back before the public and the community to see if there is an environmental, social, and economic impact. There's a benefit to the community or not. And so I think that's where we stand now. But at this time, I'm not prepared to see this proceed, and so we'll be voting to defeat this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Price. I have Councillor Herford and then Councillor French.
Thank you. When this matter was before us last in December, I was in favor of a comprehensive review to see if there, despite the OCP precursors that have been discussed not being met, I felt that I was open to the review process that may highlight some potential opportunities above and beyond existing policies that would potentially make this project supportable moving forward. So I needed that comprehensive review for me to consider moving this ahead. And I do have enough information to not support this at this time, and more information and being open to that opportunity was what I was looking for in our December 8th meeting. So at this point, I feel I have no choice but to not support this. Thank you.
Councillor Herford, Councillor French.
Thank you. And for the sake of consistency, I will be supporting this motion. I've said previously why I feel it's supportable, and I won't take valuable time tonight to repeat that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add my comments. I was part of the last council that had the pleasure of working with our community on the updated OCP for the 2040 plan. And as Councillor Race has said, we heard strongly from the community that managing growth was important for environmental, for social, and economic reasons. And so when I look at Section 9 of the OCP around the growth management policies, I don't read them each individually. They are packaged policies that work together. And in considering the application to amend the OCP to expand the growth management boundary, I don't feel that it meets the essence of 9.2A, 9.2B, C, D, and H. And I think the two most strongly are 9.2B, which speaks to focusing development within our current footprint, and H, which is the policy precursors. It's so important to have good policy in place to help manage growth, and we have more work to do there. So I will not be supporting the motion on the floor. I don't see any more hands, so I will call the question. All those opposed? Councillor Herford, Councillor Stoner, Councillor Pettengill, Councillor Gregg, opposed. The motion is defeated. Thank you, Mr. Balaniskis.
Thank you.
We are on to 9B1. This is the adoption, finally, of the amendment bylaw for the child care facility on Falcon Crescent. This is bylaw number 2706/2019. There was a memo included with this project to provide a bit of an update. I don't know if council has any questions. I think the memo covered it all, but if there are any questions prior to adoption, there is staff here to answer your question. I don't see any hands, so if someone wants to, oh, Councillor Stoner.
Just gonna move the the motion.
Moving the motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Any comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. More daycare spots available soon. Be great. 9B2, this is adoption of the 2021 to 2025 5-year financial plan. This is bylaw number 2804, 2021. Who wants to move our budget? Councillor Stoner, Councillor French, seconds. Any comments? All right, any opposed? Motion carries. We don't have any staff reports tonight. So number 11 is our consent agenda. If there's anything on the consent agenda in which you find yourself in conflict or which you would like to pull to discuss, that this is the time to do it. Councillor Stoner.
I was gonna pull letter 7, please. On the Work BC provincial wage subsidy.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Would someone like to move the rest of the consent agenda? Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Race. Any opposed? Motion carries. We don't have any late agenda items. Councillor Stoner will deal with that letter after the action requested correspondence. So we have received a number of pieces of correspondence related to the Squamish spit and the Central Estuary Restoration Project, that this correspondence be referred to the Director of Engineering for information. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. We also received a letter from Jay Brown about the Valley Cliff Hill and that be referred to the Director of Engineering. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Stoner, if you'd like to speak to your item.
Yeah, I was just going to refer this item to staff and perhaps the chamber as well. As I read it, they were just looking for some support in amplifying the communications around the program. So I was just going to refer it on.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Pattingale seconds. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up, item 14, approval of minutes. We have recommendations from Committee of the Whole that staff bring back the IDEA Staff Committee draft terms of reference to a future Committee of the Whole. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. Thank you. Any comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then also from Committee of the Whole, the Squamish Marine Zoning update that staff bring back for first reading consideration amendment bylaw for marine zones number 2771/2020 with consideration of the bullet points provided. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Herford. Almost forgot your name there. Any comments? Any, call the question? Any opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Being none, we do have committee minutes from the advisory design panel for November 19th and February 18th to receive. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. We have a number of items being brought forward from closed business meeting between January 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2020. So this is a regular housekeeping item that we do, is bring forward motions from the closed that no longer need to be there. Do we have to do these all separately? It's just for no. Oh, this is just for information. Okay. Never mind. I don't have to move anything. Thank goodness for that. We don't have any unscheduled public attendance. Any questions? Do you have some people on? Okay. Any council or staff announcements? Council Race.
Thank you. It's a report from the library at our last meeting, and there were a couple of highlights. One is all library staff and board trustees are participating in the upcoming AMSSA, which is Affiliation of Multicultural Societies and Service Agencies of BC workshop called Safe Harbor, Respect for All. An award-winning diversity and inclusion training workshop for workplaces being offered at all BC public libraries. Secondly, the board has an upcoming vacancy and will be undertaking plans to advertise for and recruit potential new trustees. One of our trustees is moving out of town. And the library's temporary project coordinator, Diana Gunstone, presented an update to the board on the development of a new visiting library service, which will coordinate the delivery of library materials to homebound community members by library volunteers. And this service will also foster ongoing connections between volunteers and homebound community members, and will be rolling out by April. And it was made possible thanks to a 2020 UBCM grant, and the library appreciates the district's endorsement of that application. And that's it, the library board.
Thank you, Councilor Reese. Any other announcements? All right, I have a couple. I want to thank Squamish Nation for the wonderful land blessing for the Buckley Avenue housing project, which will also house the Foundry and our new youth hub. I attended virtually, but Jay Russell, the executive director of Sea to Sky Cleaning Services, did a wonderful job of emceeing the event. And then all of us other political speakers, our MP, MLA, Minister Eby for BC Housing, all recorded a video that was played during the presentation. But, you know, to be able to kick off the construction of this building in such a good way through the work of Squamish Nation was very meaningful, and so appreciate all those who came out to support that work. So that was last Friday, and then tomorrow at 11 a.m. is Mayor's Drop-In, and Councilor Reese will be joining me. And our topic tomorrow, because we're now putting topics around Mayor's Drop-In, is around our marine zoning. And so our staff member, Sarah Janet, who's been working on this project, will be joining us on the call. And so it'll be a good opportunity to answer questions from the public about what it means to be zoning water lots and what the goals of the project are. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I don't think I've got anything else. Any staff announcements? So all we need to do is terminate this meeting. So, moved by Councilor Stoner, second by Councilor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.